Imagine you're a battle-hardened soldier, oxygen running low, when you stumble upon an alien child who greets you with a sarcastic, "Back, meat-snouted earth creeper." This is how Sergeant Dean Carson's life changed forever. What started as a routine rescue mission turned into a political minefield when the alien queen offered him a deal he couldn't refuse. But was it salvation or a trap? Dean Carson's HUD flashed a dull red, the oxygen counter ticking like a time bomb in his peripheral. He kicked aside a chunk of debris, the alloy groaning under his boot, and scanned the ruins of what used to be a Vraxian marketplace. The mission brief called this recon, just eyes on the ground, no engagement, but intel never accounted for the sound of a child's voice cutting through the static of his comms. "Back, meat-snouted earth creeper." The words hit him before he saw her. A Vraxian girl, no older than 8, wedged between two collapsed pillars. Her scaled skin caught the dim light, a mottled blue-green that should have blended into the rubble. But the thing in her arms glowed, a plush toy, its bioluminescence pulsing like a distress beacon. It was shaped like some alien creature, all tentacles and bulbous eyes, and it stared at him with the same defiance as the kid clutching it. Dean's finger twitched near his sidearm. Protocol said, "Leave it." Civilians were someone else's problem, especially when they weren't human. His squad was 3 clicks out, extraction in 15. But her grip on the toy was white-knuckled, and something about the way her tail coiled around her legs made his chest tight. Military psych studies call it a moral flash, the split second a soldier throws the manual out the airlock. You don't think about treaties or species lines. You just see a kid, and the math changes. Lyra, he'd learn her name later, had other plans. "Drop dead, Earther," she hissed, pressing the toy to her chest like a shield. It pulsed brighter, casting shadows up the ruined walls. That's when he noticed the blood streaking her forearm. "Kid, you're gonna get us both shot," he muttered, glancing at the O2 counter. 8%. She bared her teeth, not fangs, not quite, but sharp enough to make a point. "You leave me alone, I leave you alone." He should have walked. Should have radioed it in, let command deal with the paperwork later. But the toy's glow flickered in time with her shaky breaths, and then the ground vibrated with the distant thud of artillery. Dean exhaled through his nose, the sound harsh in his helmet. "All right, Runt. Move your little rebellion north, or I do drop dead and you get to explain that to the next patrol." Lyra scowled but untangled her legs. The toy's glow dimmed as she tucked it under her arm like a football. Dean reached for her. Bad idea. She lunged, biting his gauntlet hard enough to leave dents in the alloy. "Gah! What the hell, see?" "Now you know." She snapped back, already scrambling ahead. His HUD recalculated. Carrying a passenger meant diverting oxygen to life support, cutting his safety buffer from 7 minutes to maybe 4. The extraction point was 5. Behind them, a plume of smoke rose where his last checkpoint had been. Dean scooped her up mid-stride, ignoring her yelp and the way her claws dug into his shoulder. The toy pulsed frantic orange between them, casting jagged shapes on the rubble. He could hear her heartbeat, fast as the warnings in his helmet. "Hold on tight, fireworks." Her glare could have melted steel. "Your armpit smells like doom." The oxygen counter hit 5. End of section. The plush would have been easier to ignore if it didn't glow like a malfunctioning reactor. Every time Lyra shifted in Dean's arms, the thing pulsed, yellow when she was nervous, shifting to an agitated violet when she hissed at him for adjusting his grip. A soft beacon broadcasting their position to every sniper in the ruin. "Kid, we might survive this if you stuff that thing down your shirt." Lyra's grip tightened. "Try it, air thief." Dean ducked behind a collapsed archway, pulse hammering. The toy wasn't some off-the-shelf souvenir. He'd seen enough occupied worlds to recognize craftsmanship. Each tentacle tip had tiny claws sculpted from polished obsidian, the bioluminescence tracing intricate patterns that matched the tattoos on Lyra's wrists. Cultural artifact first, toy second. Vraxians didn't do comfort objects the human way. Their young got independence beaten into them early. By 8, most could field strip a plasma pistol. But looking at Lyra's white-knuckle grip on the thing, Deanie recognized that stubborn desperation. The same look refugee kids got when soldiers tried prying photo albums from their hands. "You got a name for that?" Lyra bristled. "Mine. I mean, what's it called? Species? Genus? Murder beast?" Her tail flicked in irritation, almost knocking the visor off his helmet. "Moogie." Then quieter. "Baby protector. Once." Dean filed that away. Past tense. He reached for it, not to take, just to see. Bad move. Lyra twisted like an eel, aiming her tiny fangs at his wrist. The toy flared crimson between them. "Settle down. I'm not—" A plasma bolt sizzled past his shoulder, blasting divots in the stone where his head had been. The Moogie's glow spiked to emergency siren intensity. Of course. Defensive bioluminescence, bright enough to blind predators when threatened. Deanne's retinas burned purple, but the sniper's second shot went wide. Lyra was laughing. "Okay," Dean rasped, blinking spots from his vision. "Good toy." Phyrexian child psychology texts would later call this moment critical, when the artifact transitions from protector to shared survival tool. Deanie just knew the kid finally stopped trying to bite him. Human prisoners of war reported similar phenomena. A button, a coin, anything small enough to hide became a totem. The Moogie wasn't just Lyra's security blanket. It was her last connection to whatever life existed before the bombs fell. Dean adjusted his grip, letting her tuck herself against his armor. The Moogie's glow dialed down to a soft teal, reacting to her slowing pulse. He spotted the flaw immediately. The left eye had been clumsily repaired, the stitching human-made. Someone else had tried fixing this before him. "Who gave it to you?" Lyra pressed her forehead against the plush. Not telling. Dean's HUD tagged movement 2 rooftops over. The Moogie dimmed on instinct as he stilled. Later, in the throne room, he'd noticed the matching tattoos on Queen Jara's hands. Later still, he'd watched delegates pass the toy between them like a sacred relic during ceasefire talks. But right then, it was just a glowing lump of fabric getting him shot at. The sniper's scope glinted. Deanne grabbed Lyra's wrist, not to take the Moogie, just to press her tiny fingers against his chest plate. "Make it flash again. They'll see." "That's the point, fireworks." Lyra hesitated, then squeezed. The explosion of light wasn't subtle. It reflected off every shard of broken glass in the kill zone, refracting like a disco ball from hell. The sniper's third shot punched through empty air as Deanie lunged sideways, Lyra whooping in his arms like this was some twisted game. The Moogie's glow stabilized at contented gold. Distant plasma fire echoed off the ruins. Closer now. End of section. Dean's HUD spat numbers at him like an angry accountant. 4.2 minutes of oxygen remaining at current expenditure. The math didn't lie. Carrying Lyra's slight frame added 37% to his metabolic burn rate. Every step toward the extraction point came with a cost. His reserve tank flattened itself a little more, his vision tunneling at the edges. Lyra, for her part, seemed utterly unconcerned with biological constraints. She tapped her claws against his chest plate in an irregular rhythm, her tail flicking whenever he adjusted course. The Moogie's glow remained steady amber, casting long shadows across broken pavement. "You're breathing too much," Deanne muttered. Lyra bared her teeth. "You walk too heavy." Space combat physiology studies all reach the same conclusion. Decision fatigue hits hardest around minute 3 of oxygen debt. The brain starts prioritizing instinct over logic, a headache blooming behind the eyes as carbon dioxide builds. Deanie's HUD helpfully visualized this with a pulsing red spiral that tightened with each exhale. He remembered the Apollo 13 transcripts from basic training. Engineers calculating battery life by flashlight, repurposing square pegs for round holes. The only difference here was his makeshift carbon scrubber involved duct tape and an 8-year-old who actively hated him. At the 2-minute mark, his legs wavered. The world narrowed to the next 5 steps, then 3, then the insistent tug of Lyra's fingers on his collar. "Ground's shaking," she said. Dean blinked sweat from his eyes. The tremors weren't seismic. just his knees betraying him. His HUD cheerfully announced 83 seconds remaining as he slumped against a shattered storefront. The extraction beacon pulsed mockingly across the plaza, impossibly far. Lyra wriggled free, her pupils contracting in the harsh daylight. She studied his heaving chest, his pallor, the way his fingers spasmed against the oxygen regulator. Then she did the worst possible thing. She understood. "Your air thing's broke." "Observant," Dean wheezed. The Moogie's glow shifted to an anxious violet as Lyra reached for his emergency release valve. Standard procedure dictated preserving the primary tank for combat medics, but procedure didn't account for tiny scaled hands yanking hoses free with terrifying efficiency. "You'll choke," Dean croaked, too late. Lyra ignored him, wedging the Moogie between her knees as she worked. She pried open his secondary oxygen cell with her claws, exposing the transfer port most soldiers never touched. With a sharp twist, she disconnected his breathing tube and split the line, one end still attached to his mask, the other trailing free. Dean's vision sparkled at the edges. It took him 3 tries to get words out. "That's not," Lyra surfaced, gasping, her scales dull with exertion. The Moogie pulsed frantic green between them. "Now we match," she said, spitting out a mouthful of tubing. Dean's hands shook as he reconnected the lines. The system wasn't designed for this, he'd be coughing up fluid for weeks, but his HUD's countdown stalled at 19 seconds. Vraxians didn't share. Not food, not territory, certainly not breath. Yet here was a royal-blooded child offering half her lung capacity to an enemy grunt. The Moogie's light rippled across her face, highlighting fresh scratches where she'd forced the connection. Dean exhaled slowly, making the air last. Lyra mirrored him, her tiny chest rising in time with his. Their shared rhythm sent the countdown ticking upward for the first time. 20 seconds, then 21. A valve ruptured somewhere behind them, hissing vapor into the ruins. End of section. The comms crackled to life just as Lyra was examining Dine's broken oxygen gauge with the intensity of a battlefield surgeon. His lieutenant's voice cut through static. "Raven actual to Carson, rally point Charlie and 6, confirm status." Standard procedure demanded a sit rep, coordinates, enemy sightings, any recovered assets. Dean's fingers hovered over the transmitter, already framing the words in his head. Lyra's teeth sank into his knuckle before he could key the mic. Military AI would have flagged the bite as a contamination risk within milliseconds. First contact protocols had entire chapters about preventing cultural exchange. Too much familiarity bred weakness, the manuals claimed. But nobody had written contingency plans for an 8-year-old combatant sabotaging your radio while covered in your own blood. Dean yanked his hand back. "What the actual hell?" "You call, they come," Lyra spat, wiping her mouth. Then, boom. She mimed an explosion with her claws, Moogie tucked underarm. Always boom. Later, historians would note how often first contact narratives got this wrong. The official reports painted these moments as grand diplomatic overtures, carefully choreographed gestures between dignified representatives. Reality was messier. Reality had a feral child guarding your comms like it was the last cookie jar in the galaxy. Dean studied the puncture marks on his glove. The venom warning on his HUD flickered, then dismissed the threat. Juvenile Vraxians didn't develop full toxicity until puberty. Small mercies. "Look," he said. Slow, like talking to a cornered animal. Which, technically, he was. "My people think I'm dead already. You want boom? Radio silence guarantees it." Lyra's tail twitched. The Moogie pulsed uncertain yellow between them. Standard operating procedures had 14 steps for hostile contact scenarios. Dean skipped to step 15. He stuck out his hand, palm up. Human basic training included exactly 3 hours of forced cultural exchange exercises. Most troops slept through them. Lyra recoiled like he'd offered her a live grenade. "Handshake," Dean explained, wiggling his fingers. "Truce thing. Means no biting for 5 minutes." Her gill slits flared, processing. The Moogie's glow shifted from warning yellow to curious amber. "Stupid human custom," she muttered. But her tiny claws crept forward, brushing his calluses. Military. Psychologists would later call this the critical rupture point, when protocol fails and improvisation takes over. D&E didn't think about interspecies relations or galactic politics. He just remembered the orphanage in New Hanoi, where war kids traded goods via increasingly complex handshake rituals. Lyra's grip was all wrong. Too much pressure on the knuckles, her thumb tucked awkwardly under his. But she didn't bite. 5 minutes, she warned. Dean nodded solemnly. Then, because he was still a soldier with a job to do, he keyed his mic one-handed. Carson to Raven. Status nominal. Proceeding alternate route. No contact. Static filled the pause before his lieutenant responded. Copy. Make it quick. Lyra yanked her hand back the second he released the transmitter. The Moogie glowed satisfied green. What now, air thief? Dion exhaled through his nose. The handshake gambit had bought him precisely 37 seconds of peace. His HUD helpfully counted down the remaining truce time. Somewhere in the ruins, plasma artillery whined its familiar song. You ever play hide-and-seek, Runt? Lyra's pupils narrowed to slits. You hide. I stab. Close enough. The static on the comms thickened into white noise as distant thunder shook the rubble. Dean watched his oxygen counter twitch, still holding at 19% since their makeshift sharing arrangement. Lyra's tiny claws flexed, already forgetting their truce. The Moogie's light caught the scratches on his armor where she'd fought their oxygen hookup earlier. Dean reached out again, slowly. Lyra hissed. But her tail curled around his wrist this time instead of striking. The comms crackled with unintelligible chatter before cutting out completely. Somewhere beyond the ruined skyline, engines howled. End of section. The extraction beacon pulsed reassuringly on Dean's HUD, 200 meters through the rubble. He shifted Lyra's weight in his arms, the Moogie's glow reflecting off cracked masonry. The kid had gone suspiciously quiet since the last plasma burst shook the district. Raven actual to Carson. His lieutenant's voice crackled. Hot LZ suggest alternate approach. Dean barely had time to register the warning when the sky split open. Their dropship came in too fast, thrusters screaming as it banked hard. Then the plasma bolt hit, a searing green lance that melted through the starboard engine like butter. The impact spun the vessel sideways, scattering debris across 3 blocks. Lyra whooped. Dean barely caught the motion before it happened. 20 Vraxian. Shock troops materializing from the ruins like specters. No helmets, no heavy armor. Just razor-sharp talons and plasma rifles with intricately carved stocks. They moved with eerie coordination, cutting off every escape route. My mother's claws, Lyra crowed, squirming in his grip. The realization hit Dean like a gut punch. All those sniper shots that barely missed, the circling patrols that never quite closed in. He'd been herded. This wasn't an extraction. It was an intercept. Special ops manuals called this a Venus flytrap gambit. Lure the rescue party into a kill box by letting them think they're saving someone. The files never mentioned what to do when the bait was a kid with diplomatic immunity. Lyra suddenly went rigid in his arms. Her tail straightened, scales flattening against her skin in a formal posture Dean hadn't seen before. Even the Moogie dimmed, to a respectful blue. The shock troops parted. Queen Jara emerged like a blade being drawn, 7 feet of coiled muscle and iridescent scales. Her armor wasn't metallic. It shifted colors like an octopus skin, camouflage patterns rippling with each step. But the real surprise was in her hands, a weapon Dean recognized instantly. Human issue, M82 plasma cutter. The rifle looked comically small in her grip. She held it with the casual familiarity of someone who dismantled and rebuilt it, blindfolded. Lyra squirmed free before Deanie could stop her. He expected her to sprint to the queen. Instead, she folded into a precise bow, right claw pressed over her heart in formal greeting. Mother. The word landed with the weight of an artillery shell. DNEs. HUD flickered, struggling to recalibrate threat assessments. Every tactical readout screamed red. He was outgunned, surrounded, holding roughly 70 pounds of royal leverage that apparently didn't want to be leveraged. The Queen's nostrils flared as she took in Dean's battered armor, the jury-rigged. Oxygen line still dangling from his chest plate, Lyra's claw marks on his gauntlets. "You're the one who taught my child to breathe poison," Jara said. Her voice wasn't the expected aristocratic boom. It was quiet, measured, the way snipers spoke, before pulling triggers. Dean considered reaching for his sidearm just to make the standoff properly symmetrical. Then Lyra elbowed him hard in the ribs. The shock troops tensed as he coughed. "Call it cultural exchange." Jara tilted her head, studying him like an interesting bug. The plasma cutter in her hands hummed as it cycled to full power. Somewhere above them, the crippled dropship groaned, its remaining engine spitting sparks. "Weapons down," Jara commanded. Not to Dean, to her own troops. Every rifle barrel lowered in unison. The Queen took 3 measured steps forward, close enough that Dean could see the flecks of gold in her slit-pupilled eyes. She smelled of ozone and something earthy, like burnt cinnamon. The plasma cutter's muzzle came up, not to fire, but to tap twice against Dean's chest plate. "The universal soldier's greeting. You owe me oxygen," Jara said. Behind her, Lyra grinned, showing all her tiny fangs. The Mugi glowed triumphantly green in her arms. Static filled Deanie's comms as his squad's last transmission cut out mid-word. The wrecked dropship groaned again, its metal skeleton creaking in the wind. Some rescuer he turned out to be. The throne room wasn't what Dean expected. No gold, no jewels. Just a ring of humming projectors casting blue light across Queen Jara's scales. The holographic display shifted as she moved, tactical readouts orbiting her like electrons around a nucleus. Battle simulations played out, in miniature above her claws, human troop movements, supply lines, projected casualty counts. "You're thinking too hard, Earther," Jara said. Dean flexed his fingers. They'd taken his weapons but left his damaged armor. The oxygen recycler wheezed softly at his hip, still jury-rigged from Lyra's modifications. Across the room, the kid slurped something purple from a bowl, Mugi wedged between her knees. The Queen tapped one claw against her projection. A star map expanded, Earth's solar system glowing amber at the edge. "Odd thing about war," she mused. "It takes men like you to fight it, and men like your commanders to keep it burning." Dean recognized the gambit. Prisoner exchanges often started this way. Offer the captive what they lack. Food for the starving, medical care for the wounded. In his case, oxygen. "You want me to believe you're different," he said. Jara's claws flickered through holograms like flipping pages. "I want you to breathe, soldier." Strange concept. The projections shifted to show Vraxian settlements, smoking craters where human artillery had struck. Then human refugee camps with Vraxian medics working the lines. The juxtaposition was too clean, too calculated. Histories full of queens who played the reasonable monster card. Offer the prisoner tea before asking them to betray their people. But the battered M82 plasma cutter leaning against Jara's makeshift throne complicated the narrative. Lyra giggled suddenly, sticky-faced from her meal. "Mother never lies," she announced, as if this explained everything. Jara exhaled through slitted nostrils. "We recovered 7 human children last week. Found them in a bunker near the Tansin line." Her claws moved again. The display showed human kids playing in a Vraxian garden looking healthier than half the troops in Dean's company. Their own army left them behind. Dean's mouth tasted like copper. He'd seen the evacuation orders for Tansin. Command had labeled it a tactical recalibration. The lighting changed as Jara leaned forward. The projections dimmed. The room's bioluminescent fungi brightened in response. "You interest me, Carson of Earth. A soldier with no agenda. Just lungs that work and hands that fix things." She tapped her throne arm. The entire display reconfigured to show a single equation. Oxygen, output versus consumption rates across both armies' supply lines. "War is just math with consequences," Jara said. We could use someone who understands both. Dean's vision wavered. The room's oxygen mix was richer than Earth standard, making him lightheaded. Or maybe it was the offer lurking beneath her words, the unspoken promise that he'd see frontline reports first, maybe even influence targeting. Lyra dropped her bowl with a clatter. He fixes everything, she declared. Moogie held aloft. Even this, the plush toy's left eye still showed clumsy human stitching, Dean's work. Jara's pupils dilated fractionally. So I see, military psychologists have a term for this, the reciprocity trap. Give a prisoner small comforts first, then ask for small favors. The favors grow and suddenly you're complicit. Dean stared at the toy. He'd stitched it because he couldn't stand seeing something broken. No strategy, no calculus. Just muscle memory from patching his sister's dolls in another life. The projections shifted again, his own face now, lifted from security footage. The video showed him crouched beside Lyra in the ruins, rerouting oxygen lines with shaking fingers. Jara's claws retracted slightly. You were dying. She was leverage. And yet, the unscientific part of the brain makes terrible wartime decisions. It sees a crying child as a person, not an asset. Dean rubbed his chest where Lyra's makeshift tube had left bruises. You want me to believe that matters, he said. Jara's tail twitched. The holograms dissolved into stardust. I want you to believe nothing. Just breathe, soldier. The rest comes later. Lyra chose that moment to climb onto the throne, dripping purple juice, down her mother's arm. Jara didn't flinch. The display adjusted around them both, Earth's orbit glowing steady against the void. D&E's HUD scavenged from damaged armor could have told him the exact atmospheric composition of the room, the pressure gradient, the toxicity levels in his Idiot floodstream. None of the numbers explained why he nodded. The bioluminescent fungi pulsed once as Jara rose. Somewhere beyond the spire walls, human artillery rumbled. End of section. The chair wasn't cold. That's what surprised Dine first. Its surface hummed against his back like a sleeping engine, tendrils of bioluminescent wiring twining up his arms. Vraxian neurotech didn't need electrodes or scalpels. The restraints molded to his pulse points instead, reading him through skin contact alone. Jara circled the apparatus like a surgeon assessing a tricky incision. We call it the Kolva, so, she said. Truth sieve. Dean flexed his fingers against the armrests. Standard lie detector tests worked off sweat glands and vocal tremors. Crude, by comparison. The Kolvas didn't care what you said. It cared what you remembered. The first memory hit like a misfired round to the temple. Kessler's face filled his vision. His old squad mate, halfway through a joke about Martian brothels when the plasma bolt took off his jaw. The moment rewound and replayed in jagged loops until Dean could count every tooth in Kessler's last smile. Across the chamber, Lyra giggled. The sound tangled with Kessler's death rattle, syrupy childhood joy layered over combat horror. The Kolvasi's secret sauce? Emotional whiplash. It yanked neural pathways wide open by juxtaposing your worst traumas with incongruous joy. PTSD meets Pavlov. Jara monitored the readouts flaring across the chair's base. You humans bury pain under layers of narrative, she mused. The Kolvas scrapes it raw. Dean's ribs ached like he'd been running. Real fMRI tech could map. Brain activity, sure, but this thing curated. It cherry-picked memories with terrifying precision. Here's your sister's funeral. Here's Lyra dangling the Moogie by one tentacle and cackling. Modern psychiatry would faint at the methodology. Studies showed memory manipulation could overwrite. Trauma, but brute-forcing the process risked neural fraying. The Kolvas didn't bother with safeguards. Its creators considered psychological scarring part of the test. Lyra kicked her legs on an observation bench, watching Dine sweat. You look funny, she announced. Jara's claws tapped a staccato rhythm against the chair's base. The resonance falters when subjects lie, she said. But your problem is different. The machine agreed. Its readouts spiked erratically. Whenever Dine relived combat, not from deception but from cognitive dissonance. His brain kept trying to reconcile two irreconcilable truths. Soldiers should hate their enemies, and yet, Lyra's laughter echoed again as the Kolvas served up fresh hell. This time it was the Tansin evacuation, watching medics abandon their post under fire. The memory stuttered, overlaid with Lyra handing him a half-peeled fruit yesterday, sticky fingers pressing it into his palm like a sacred offering. Dean's fingers dug into the armrests. Human brains weren't built for this seesawing. The Kolvas's designers knew that. Its cruelty was the point. "Your vitals fascinate me," Jara said. Her claw traced a particularly jagged spike on the readout. "Most humans show uniform stress patterns when recalling their dead. Yours bifurcate." Deanie ground his teeth as another wave hit. PFC Santos bleeding out in the mud. Her last words, "Tell my kid." Then Lyra's voice piped up from nowhere. "You're stinky, but I like you." The chair shuddered. Feedback screeched through its tendrils as Diné's emotional wiring short-circuited. The machine couldn't reconcile his grief with the warmth flaring. Behind his sternum at Lyra's nonsense, Jara's nostrils flared. Vraxian body language was hard to read, but that might have been surprise. "The Kolvas tests more than truth," she said quietly. "It tests capacity for change." Lyra hopped down from her bench, bored with the grown-up talk. She wandered over and poked one of the chair's glowing filaments. The machine made a noise like a whining dog. "That means it's done," Jara said. "Denois." Expected the restraints to release. Instead, Lyra clambered onto his lap, effectively pinning him further. The Kolvas emitted a confused burble. Its programming didn't account for small children using test subjects as jungle gyms. "You passed," Lyra announced, shoving the Moogie into his chest. Jara made a soft clicking noise. The restraints peeled away with a sound like tape being pulled from skin. Dean sucked in a lungful of unfiltered air. His shirt clung to his back, drenched in sweat the machine hadn't technically forced out of him. The Kolvas' final readout pulsed between them. 16 distinct neural pathways fundamentally altered, some by trauma, some by the tiny fists currently yanking his hair as Lyra demanded pancakes. Jara studied the data with an unreadable expression. "Interesting," was all she said. The chair's restraints coiled back into their housing with a series of wet, organic clicks. Lyra's laughter chased the echoes down the chamber's curved walls. Lyra smashed her fist on the strategy table hard enough to make the holographic troop deployments flicker. "Pancakes," she declared, with the absolute certainty of an 8-year-old whose patience for diplomacy had expired 12 minutes ago. The Vraxian War Council stared. Their scaled faces registered varying degrees of confusion and disgust. Human, food ranked somewhere between sewage and superstition in their cultural hierarchy. Only Jara looked unfazed, her claws tapping against the tactical display showing Earth's agricultural zones. Deanie rubbed his temples. Breakfast hadn't been part of the negotiations. Neither had the confiscated human care package he'd been hoarding. Its contents now strewn across the command center's pristine floor. Powdered eggs, instant coffee, and the real prize, a dented can of maple syrup with property of Mars Colony 12 scratched into the lid. Lyra sniffed the open syrup can. Her pupils dilated immediately. Vraxian olfactory receptors are 30 times more sensitive than human noses. "This is good poison," she announced, licking her claws clean. Human Vraxian diplomacy had crashed over pettier things. First contact. Studies show food-related incidents account for 17% of initial conflicts. DNE recognized the turning point. This wasn't about nutrition. It was about testing borders through taste buds. "Explain the appeal," Jara said quietly. DN picked up the pancake mix packet. The instructions had faded into illegibility somewhere between Earth and the front lines. "Flour, water, pan, that's it." Lyra poked the powder suspiciously. "Where's the crunch? The texture?" "That comes later," Dean muttered, already scanning the room for anything resembling a skillet. Vraxian culinary traditions favored live prey and mineral-rich clays. Their version of haute cuisine involved sonic tenderizing and plasma searing. Watching Dean dump powder into a salvaged ration tin provoked visible discomfort among the generals. One actually gagged when he added water. Lyra, however, was mesmerized. She leaned so close to the makeshift stove that her nose nearly touched the heating coil. "It's changing," she whispered as the first bubbles formed in the batter. The War Council's tension spiked when Dean flipped the pancake. By human standards, it was a sad specimen. Unevenly browned, slightly lumpy. But Lyra reacted like he'd performed alchemy. "Mine first," she demanded, tail slapping the floor. Every anthropology text agrees. Sharing food builds trust faster than any treaty. There's a reason trade routes followed spice trails, why business deals close over dinners. Dean glanced at Jara. The Queen's expression gave nothing away, but her claws had retracted slightly, a subtle tell. He slid the pancake onto an overturned data pad. Lyra pounced, nearly taking his fingers with it. The generals recoiled as she drenched the thing in syrup, the sticky liquid oozing across what had been their troop deployment charts. Jara raised one scaled brow. "You feed your young carbohydrates and tree sap?" "Only on special occasions," DNA said. "Like surviving interstellar war." Lyra's first bite was tentative. Her second sent syrup flying across 3 dignitaries. "More," she demanded, mouth full. The room's bioluminescent fungi dimmed in collective horror as Dean poured another round. The smell caught them all: warm wheat, caramelizing sugars, that unmistakable burnt toast edge of slightly messed up cooking. Jara inhaled sharply. Olfactory memories work the same across species. Lyra smacked a syrup-coated pancake onto her mother's claw. "Try." Silence stretched like taffy. Every Vraxian in the room stopped breathing. Royalty didn't eat primitive food. Royalty didn't take orders from children. Royalty certainly didn't. Jara took a bite. It wasn't gracious. Her nose wrinkled. Her throat worked like she was swallowing medicine. But the reaction that followed, the slight loosening of her shoulders, the involuntary flick of her tongue catching a stray drop of syrup, echoed in every watching face. Dean watched realization dawn. The general shifted, some discreetly sniffing the air. One young aide actually licked his lips. Cultural contamination worked both ways. Lyra crowed victory, her snaggle-toothed grin dripping syrup. "Told you!" Jara wiped her claws fastidiously. But when she spoke, it wasn't to her council. "Dean Carson of Earth, yeah? You will teach our kitchens this ritual." Across the room, the holographic war map still pulsed. Earth's farmlands glowed amber under Vraxian analysis. But the real weapon of mass persuasion sizzled on a repurposed hot plate, filling the command center with the exact smell of a Sunday morning back on Earth. Burning batter never smelled so diplomatic. The hangar alarms whooped like angry birds as the human Marines breached the airlock. Dean recognized the armor modifications immediately. Reinforced knee joints from the Tarkin campaign. Scavenged Vraxian plasma cells bolted onto standard-issue chest plates. His old squad moved in textbook formation, rifles sweeping the vaulted chamber. A plasma turret swiveled from the ceiling. Before it could fire, Lyra's shrill voice cut through the din. "No boom! They're mine!" Her tiny fists gripped the balcony railing, whole body vibrating with outrage. Jara's guards hesitated, claws flexing. Their orders were clear. Intruders got vaporized on sight. But nobody briefed them on protocol when the princess declared hostiles her personal property. Commander Vic's helmet speaker crackled. "Carson, extract now or get tagged MIA." The voice echoed weirdly in Dean's skull. 6 months ago, that same man had shared a flask with him behind the motor pool. Dean counted weapons: 7 pulse rifles, 2 plasma cutters, somebody's jury-rigged sonic grenade, enough to take out a quarter of the spire. The math didn't account for one variable. Lyra vaulted the railing. She hit the hangar floor with a clatter. Moogie clutched like a battering ram. The Marines' barrels jerked downward in unison. Tactical. Manuals don't cover what to do when a semi-royal alien child charges your firing line screaming, "Mine, mine, mine." Dean moved without thinking. He intercepted Lyra mid-stride, scooping her up as her claws flashed toward Private Cho's shins. "You brought a whole battalion for little old me?" Dine asked. His voice came out drier than he felt. Vix's visor tilted. "Orders. Either come quietly or—" Jara's guards chose that moment to encircle the Marines from behind, their scales shifting to match the hangar walls. The standoff settled into place like a chessboard mid-game. History loves these moments. Defections, standoffs, the single choice that pivots wars. Vienna, 1961. The Berlin Wall kitchen table debates. This one had worse interior decorating. Lyra kicked Deanie's ribs. "Put me down. I bite them first." Marine rifles twitched toward the squirming kid. Jara's guards hissed in unison. Somewhere above, the plasma turret whined back to life. Dean exhaled through his nose. "You boys bring extra ammo?" The joke landed like a lead balloon. Vic's finger tightened on the trigger. "Last chance, Sergeant." Dean adjusted his grip on Lyra. The Moogie pressed against his chest, its left eye stitches rough under his thumb. He remembered patching it in the ruins, back when lines were simpler. "See? That's the thing," he said. "Not sure whose sergeant I am anymore." The hangar lights flickered. A recorded voice announced atmospheric recalibration in 3 languages. Nobody moved. Lyra went preternaturally still. "You stay with me," she whispered. Not a question. A demand. From someone who'd already lost too much. Dean looked at Vix. Really looked. The stress fractures in his old CO's armor. The burn marks where someone had welded human and alien tech together in desperation. War made scavengers of them all. The safeties clicked off in unison. Dean stepped forward. "Here's how this plays. You lower the rifles. I vouch for your surrender. And nobody has to explain to Fleet Command why they shot the princess." Lyra beamed, showing every fang. Vix's helmet tilted toward his squad. Their muzzles dipped slightly. Not surrender, just recalibration. Jara's guards didn't relax. Neither did the plasma turrets. But when Dean finally set Lyra down, her first move wasn't biting. She stomped over to Cho and yanked on his rifle strap until he crouched. "You smell like Dad," she announced. Then, conspiratorially, "He also lost." The private's knuckles went white on his rifle stock. Dean rubbed his temples. Life used to be simpler when he just shot things. Vix finally broke the silence. "So what now?" Lyra snatched his sidearm before anyone could react. She studied it solemnly, then handed it back grip first. "Now you eat pancakes," she declared. Somewhere above them, the defense system's targeting lasers winked out one by one. The hangar smelled of ozone and stale rations and something suspiciously like syrup. War stories never mention these moments, the lulls where nobody knows what comes next, so they default to breakfast. Dean watched his old squad exchange glances. Watched Jara's guards recalibrate threat assessments. Watched Lyra confiscate 3 more sidearms with terrifying efficiency. Cho surrendered his backup pistol without protest. "What the hell are we doing, sir?" Dean met Vix's visor, saw his own reflection stretched thin across the polymer. "Losing," he said. "Just maybe not the way you think." The last safety clicked off, but the shot never came. The council chambers, acoustics turned every whisper into an echo. Dean shifted in his seat, still stiff from yesterday's firefight, as ministers droned about supply chain protocols. Then the doors banged open. Lyra stormed in, wrapped head to tail in a reflective emergency blanket, the metallic fabric crinkling with each step. She'd torn holes for her arms and tied a length of med tape around her neck like a cape. The Moogie poked out from a makeshift pocket, its glow reflecting off the foil in psychedelic patterns. Presenting her radiance, savior of the spire, she announced, arms spread wide. The head minister's nasal slits flared in displeasure. "This is a budgetary hearing, not a—" Lyra leaped onto the central dais before he finished. The blanket shimmered as she spun, sending prismatic light skittering across centuries-old murals of Vraxian conquests. Council members shielded their eyes, partly from the glare, partly from secondhand embarrassment. Child psychology texts will tell you play is how young minds process trauma. What they don't mention is how disruptive that looks during trade negotiations. Lyra's makeshift cape wasn't just a costume. It was armor stitched together from the same supplies that had sealed her plasma burns 2 weeks prior. Annie should have stopped her. Protocol demanded it. But the way she kept adjusting her cape with bloody fingers, small jabs from trying to puncture the tough material, made his chest ache. "Deflects enemy fire," Lyra informed a horrified undersecretary, pointing at her shoulder. "Also maintains core temperature," a junior minister snorted. The sound died when Lyra whirled on him, blanket flaring. "Mock me and face justice, villain!" Jara, to her credit, didn't intervene. Her claws tapped a lazy rhythm as Lyra commandeered the holoprojector to demonstrate her cape's powers, knocking over a ceremonial vase in the process. Anne caught the subtle shift in the Queen's expression. Where others saw disruption, Jara saw calculation. Every war-torn culture rediscovers this truth eventually. Children rebuild worlds faster than diplomats because they're not burdened by old rules. 10 credits says she tries to fly off the balcony, muttered a human aide. Dean surprised himself by responding. Double that she sticks the landing. Lyra's makeshift superhero identity had layers she couldn't articulate. Becoming the savior of the spire let her reframe the battle, scars hidden under the blanket. The same kid who'd bitten him bloody months ago now rescued council staff by shoving nutrient packs into their hands. The head minister reached for her. Lyra dodged, her cape snagging on his ceremonial scepter. For 3 excruciating seconds, they played tug-of-war with a piece of human first aid gear while the entire cabinet watched. Then the Moogie fell out of her pocket. Silence crashed down. The plush lay between them, one obsidian eye catching the light. Someone coughed. Lyra scooped it up, blanket rustling, and defiantly shoved it into the minister's hands. "Moogie protects you too," she said. "Even if you're boring." Dean recognized the moment, not just because the minister awkwardly patted the toy like it might explode, but because Lyra's next act was to drag her blanket over to the human delegation and dump half of it on Corporal Cho's lap. "Your turn," she said. The stiff-necked Marine stared at the shimmering fabric. Then, with agonizing slowness, he tied it around his shoulders. By meeting's end, 7 officials wore foil capes, mostly to placate Lyra, partly because nobody wanted to be the only adult left out. Later, muralists would immortalize that absurd scene, human and Vraxian silhouettes united under crinkled silver. The real triumph wasn't in the artwork, but in the way Minister Krell adjusted Lyra's lopsided collar afterward. How Cho kept forgetting to return his Dai-Din found the leftover blanket scraps that night. The edges were singed where Lyra had tried to fireproof them with a plasma lighter. Some revolutions don't need manifestos. Just a kid, a stolen medkit, and the stubborn belief that everyone deserves a cape. The foil crinkled softly in the ventilation draft. The chair started complaining the moment Dean sat down. 73% spinal tension detected, it hummed, the bioluminescent moss along its arms pulsing an accusatory orange. Suggested remedy: stop clenching like a grounded shuttle. Council Minister Velen droned on about trade routes while Dean's seat periodically vibrated under his thighs. Workplace wellness tech back on Earth was bad enough. AI assistants nagging about hydration and standing desks. Vraxian furniture took it personally. "You're slouching again," the chair murmured. A tendril of moss nudged his lumbar region with the precision of a physiotherapist who hated him. Across the negotiation table, Lyra kicked her legs. Her own chair remained suspiciously silent. Real-time stress-adjusting ergonomics weren't new. Human office chairs had crude versions that heated or massaged based on heart rate. Vraxian tech went further. Their smart furniture adapted not just to your body, but your apparent stupidity. DN shifted. The moss made a wet, disapproving sound. "Perhaps the human delegate requires additional support?" Minister Velen sneered, noting Deanie's discomfort. That's when Lyra's fingers flew across her chair's control panel. Deanie's seat suddenly contracted around him like a living hug. "Special mode engaged," it announced cheerfully. Then, in Lyra's exact pitching voice, "Stinky human needs extra cuddles." Half the delegation choked. The other half pretended not to hear. Sentient furniture had been a Vraxian staple for centuries. Histories claimed the first models were designed to curb royal assassination attempts, chairs that could restrain poisoned occupants until medics arrived. Modern versions maintained posture while gently shaming users into self-care. Lyra had other plans. "Say please," her chair commanded, refusing to release Dean fully. Trade talks ground to a halt. Minister Veln's nostrils flared as his own chair began imitating the nonsense. "This is a diplomatic chamber, not a—" Lyra leaned forward. Her chair echoed louder. "Stinky human, stinky human." What happened next wasn't in any protocol manual. The head translator's chair malfunctioned first, its moss flashing in time with Lyra's like a corrupted chorus line. Then Veln's seat started, criticizing his breathing technique. Within minutes, half the chamber's furniture had joined the mutiny. "You are," Deanie's chair informed him sagely. 36% less tense than when we began. Improvement noted. High-stakes negotiations often hinge on absurd moments. The Treaty of Paris nearly collapsed over a misplaced hat. The Luna Accord stalled because someone's pet lunar ferret got loose in the chambers. Here, amidst the chaos of sentient furniture gone rogue, something unexpected happened. Both sides started laughing. Lyra beamed like she'd solved cold fusion. "See? Funny helps." Dean's chair sighed dramatically and finally released him. The moss dimmed to a contented blue. "Its job done." Later, analysts would pinpoint this as the turning point in human-Vraxian relations, not the trade concessions or military stand-downs, but the morning the entire High Council got verbally abused by their own chairs. The talking point memos never mentioned how Minister Veln's seat kept calling him Grumpy Scales for weeks afterward, or how Lyra programmed the war room furniture to announce visitors with fart noises. But everyone remembered Diney's defeated expression as his chair affectionately dubbed him Stinky Ambassador for the rest of the summit. As peace treaties go, it was the most ridiculous one in galactic history, and somehow that made it stick. The scent of ozone and moss hung heavy in the chamber. Somewhere, a chair muttered about improper lumbar support. The screens flickered first, a jagged burst of static across every display in the spire. Then Commander Vix's face resolved into perfect clarity, his scar cutting through his stubble the way Dean remembered from 100 pre-op briefings. The transmission hijacked everything: control panels, security feeds, even the damn smart mirrors in the refresher stalls. "You're their puppet now," Vix said. His voice echoed through the marble halls like live artillery. "Psychological warfare manuals love this technique. Flood the enemy's safe spaces with your message until their walls talk for you. Ancient Earth regimes used to blast propaganda from street poles. The modern version just swapped speakers for quantum-entangled data streams." Lyra froze mid-bite into a syrup-covered waffle. "Why's Angry Face yelling about you?" Dean didn't answer. He was too busy counting the insignias on Vix's uniform, 3 new campaign pins since they'd last spoken. The 7th Frontier, the Zeta Siege, operations he would have been part of if he hadn't, well, you traded your species for a warm meal and a pat on the head, Vix continued. The camera pulled back to show rows of fresh recruits behind him, their armor gleaming under harsh lights. Second Fleet remembers traitors. Lyra's waffle dripped onto the table. "What's a traitor?" The word landed like a gut punch. Defector. Psychology is funny that way. Hearing it from a kid made it sound ridiculous. Dean watched his own reflection glitch across multiple screens, distorted by the transmission artifacts. Vix wasn't finished. The projection switched to combat footage, human prisoners in Vraxian custody, some looking disturbingly well-fed. Then a slow zoom on DN sharing rations with Jara's shock troops. The edit was clean enough to almost look real. "They're using you," Vix said, "and you're too far gone to see it." Lyra's claws dug into Dean's sleeve. "He's lying. We don't use you. We share. Propaganda works best when it's half true." The transmission showed all the cozy moments, Dini fixing Vraxian gear, laughing at their jokes, teaching Lyra human curse, words but cut every frame of him yelling at the council or Jara threatening to space him. A highlight reel of betrayal with none of the messy context. Vix leaned closer to the camera, his eyes locking onto some imagined version of Dion in the middle distance. One chance, Carson. Walk out that spire and we'll call it temporary insanity. Silence stretched. Somewhere in the spire's lower levels, a pipe burst spraying mist across a bank of still glowing screens. Lyra's tail thumped against Dion's leg. Are you going? The question hung there, simpler than it had any right to be. Dine studied the scattered waffle bits on her plate, the way she'd arranged them into lopsided constellations, remembered her screaming at him for taking the Moogie, then pressing that same toy into a terrified medic's hands during the last bombardment. No, he said. Lyra blinked. So did half the Vraxian staff monitoring the transmission. D&E hadn't planned the answer. It just slipped out. Quiet, but final. Not a grand statement about peace or principles. Just an old grunt too tired to hate the people who shared their batteries and let him fix things. Vix's sneer turned icy. Enjoy your alien masters. The screens cut to black, then, for 3 full seconds, showed something the fleet definitely didn't authorize. Lyra's Moogie plush sitting proudly on the War Council table, its repaired eye staring directly into the camera. Someone had stuck a tiny human Vraxian alliance pin to its tentacle. Static swallowed the image. Lyra poked Dian's ribs. You're not a treater. What am I then? My human. She said it like explaining water was wet, then went back to demolishing her waffle tower. The spire's systems rebooted one by one, screens returning to navigation charts and duty rosters. Somewhere in the silence, Dean realized his hands had stopped shaking, frozen on the last active display. Vix's face caught mid-snarl, forever cycling through the final frame before disconnect. A perfect shot of outrage with no one left to witness. The council chamber's vaulted ceilings fooled everyone at first glance. What looked like carved marble veins were actually coolant channels. The decorative metal scrollwork? Emergency shutter releases. Dean noticed the gun ports last, thin seams in the artwork that only became visible when the morning light hit at 27 degrees. Lyra kicked her feet against the bench, watching him track the defenses. Pretty, right? Real subtle, Dean muttered. Ambassadorial security followed the same principles galaxy-wide. Earth's old UN building hid blast doors behind mahogany panels. The Vulpex Concord kept neutron dampeners in their chandeliers. But the Vraxians took it further. Their entire spire balanced lethality against luxury like a predator playing dead. Jara's claws clicked against the armrest of her knot throne. Something troubling you, human? Dean pointed to the ceiling without looking up. That mural's firing solution covers both exits. The artwork depicted some historic battle, its swirling blues and greens disguising the plasma turret tracking. Grooves. Lyra giggled. Mom says beauty should bite back. Military history backed the design. The Ilarian Concord fell because their peace gardens didn't have overlapping fields of fire. The spire's architects clearly learned that lesson. Every aesthetic choice doubled as a kill zone. Ian ran his fingers along the bench's underside. His calluses caught on hair-thin trigger wires disguised as wood grain. Charming. Paranoid, Lyra corrected cheerfully. She flipped open a hidden panel in the armrest, revealing a biometric scanner. Jara's tail twitched, but she didn't intervene. The scanner lit up under Lyra's palm. Across the chamber, sections of that mural slid aside with a whisper, exposing 3 rotary plasma emitters. Their charging coils glowed faintly green. Disabling code is a nursery rhyme, Lyra announced. Watch. She hummed 5 notes, something lilting and childlike, and the emitters powered down with a disappointed whine. The panel slid shut, battle scene undisturbed. Dean blinked. That's your security protocol? A kid's song? Her first composition, Jara said. There was something almost proud in the way she watched Lyra. The spire recognizes only 2 voices for that sequence. Mine and hers. The weight of that trust gesture settled between them. Military tacticians would call it insanity. giving an alien access to your last line of defense. But real peace never came from weaponized embassies or demilitarized zones. It came from a kid teaching you how to dismantle her home's teeth. Lyra kicked him again. Your turn. The scanner stayed cold under Dean's hand. Jara's nostrils flared. Obviously it won't. Lyra slapped her palm over his. The scanner pinged. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the mural's hidden seams glowed amber. Not the hostile red of a breach alert, but the warm gold of recognized entry. The spire had just catalogued DNA's biometrics alongside royal bloodlines. The silence stretched, taut enough to snap. Jara's claws were half unsheathed. Explain. Lyra shrugged. Mugi likes him. The plush in question sat on the conference table between them, its repaired eye facing the now sealed gun ports. Dion suddenly understood why Lyra insisted on bringing it to every meeting. The toy was both safe conduct and silent witness. Jara exhaled sharply through her nasal slits. When she spoke again, it wasn't to Lyra. That melody has a second verse, for full lockdown. It wasn't trust exactly, more like calibrated risk, the kind of gamble kings make when they're tired of war. Dion memorized the notes as Lyra sang them, her voice bouncing off murder holes disguised as air vents. Got it, he said when she finished. But I won't use it, obviously, Lyra scoffed. Because you're stinky, but you're ours. The mural's hidden seams pulsed once, then faded. Somewhere in the walls, servos whined as tracking systems reset. Dean's reflection stared back from the polished table, human, scarred, impossibly out of place, and yet here he sat, holding the keys to the kingdom in a child's nonsense rhyme. Lyra yawned and flopped against his side. Tell me the one about the 3-legged moon cow again. The hum of retracting turrets faded into the spire's white noise. Another layer of defenses peeled back. Another line crossed without fanfare. That's how peace happens, really. Not with grand ceremonies or signed parchments, but with small choices. A song, a scanner, a kid too stubborn to see sides. Some revolutions come quietly. Some come with plasma batteries disguised as art. The gravity farm stank of wrongness, earth wheat bobbing in 0G while Vraxian crystal fruit spiraled, in precise formations beside them. Both species crops swayed like drunk dancers at a bad wedding, forced into the same room by politicians who didn't understand agriculture. Dean rubbed his neck where the grav regulator's hum buzzed under his skin. Lyra poked at a floating seedling. They look sad. They're not supposed to pulse, Dean muttered. The Vraxian gene mod crew had promised their luminous barley wouldn't interfere with human crops. They'd lied. Every time the barley flexed its bioluminescent proteins, the wheat kernels nearby twitched like startled rabbits. Agricultural diplomacy had doomed more treaties than trade disputes. The Andromeda conflict started over fertilizer tariffs. The Luna Accord almost collapsed when Martian potatoes refused to grow under artificial light. Here it wasn't just a crop issue. Half the Spire's traditionalists viewed the hybrid farm as cultural contamination. The sabotage came overnight. Dian found the first casualties at dawn. Human seedlings snapped at the stems, their roots floating, in gel-like torn ligaments. Some Vraxian crops fared worse. Entire crystal orchards desynchronized from their gravity nodes, their fragile mineral branches crumbling mid-rotation. Lyra crouched beside a broken wheat stalk, her small claws steady, as she splinted it with med tape. Fixable, she declared. The agricultural AIs disagreed. Their frantic glyphs scrolled across every screen. Ecological incompatibility flashed in urgent red for the 14th time that hour. Eni dug through the wreckage and found old-fashioned knife marks beneath the high-tech vandalism. Someone hadn't trusted the tech to do the job right. Jara arrived with 3 armed guards, her nostrils flaring at the scent of spilled nutrient fluids. Predictable, she said, towing a shattered crystal with her claw. Lyra waved a salvaged seedling. We replant. The guards exchanged glances. No protocol existed for this. Royal heirs demanding fieldwork while saboteurs lurked. Dean hauled the wrecked growth pods into a pile. Gonna need more guards than that. He wasn't wrong. By noon, 7 humans and 12 Vraxians stood watch over the replanting effort. The two groups eyed each other like rival gangs on a prison yard. Lyra broke the tension by dumping a bucket of wet soil onto Corporal Cho's boots. Grip better now, yes? Cho stared at his ruined shine. Then slowly, deliberately, he scooped mud onto a floating seedling tray. Like this, kid? Agricultural history rarely records these pivot points. The moment Viking settlers shared winter, wheat with Native Americans, the day Martian hydroponic farmers swapped seeds with lunar orchardists. Here, under the wary eyes of armed escorts, something similar happened. Vraxian agrarians stopped lecturing about primitive earth methods and started copying Cho's technique. Not everyone approved. Traditionalists glared from the observation, deck their tails lashing. One elder actually spat over the railing. The viscous glob froze instantly in 0G, becoming an impromptu protest art piece. Dean patted soil around a gene-spliced sapling. Watch this one. Glows when thirsty. Lyra poked it. The plant obliged with a faint blue pulse. By sunset, 3/4 of the crops floated repaired in their gravity bubbles. The barley still pulsed. The wheat still twitched. But now they did. It in sync like partners finally finding rhythm. Jara surveyed the work, her claws clicking against a datapad. They called this impossible in the High Council. Diné wiped muddy hands on his pants. Could have told you that. But you didn't. Lyra interrupted by dragging over an uprooted crystal fruit. Its roots dangled, severed from their nutrient stream. The kid's claws were brown with earth soil, her scales streaked with sweat. This too, she insisted. Cho was closest. He hesitated. Vraxian crops needed specialized handling, then cradled the broken roots like he'd been studying their care. Manuals, the guards tensed. The traditionalists held their breath. Cho buried the roots in Martian regolith mix with the solemnity of a surgeon closing a wound. No one clapped. No one cheered. But when the first tendril of new growth spiraled out hours later, thin but determined, even, the guards stopped pretending not to check. The scent of alien soil and earth wheat mixed with ozone and sweat. Somewhere above them, sabotage became irrelevant. Rebellions grow quietly. They take root in muddy hands and splinted stalks, in the stubborn refusal to let things die. Peace, it turns out, smells like compost and determination. The negotiation table had gone quiet again. Minister Veln's latest demand, unconditional release of all human POWs before further talks, hung in the air like a bad smell. Across the table, Admiral Check's tail tip tapped an irritated rhythm against the floor. Again. Lyra took one look at the stony faces and dropped Moogie between them. The plush landed with a soft plop, its bioluminescence pulsing steady turquoise. One obsidian eye faced the human delegation, the other the Vraxian command staff. For 5 heartbeats, nobody breathed. Conflict resolution experts would later call this the neutral object technique, something to shift focus from entrenched positions. The Geneva Conventions used white flags. The Lunar Accords famously employed a shared teapot. Here, it was one well-loved alien toy with a human-stitched eye. Check broke first. Remove that thing. Lyra crossed her arms. Moogie listens now. Dean watched the toy's glow reflect in the Admiral's narrowed pupils. 11 hours of negotiations had gotten them precisely nowhere, stuck in the same loop of demands and counter-demands. The Moogie just sat there radiating innocence, its tentacles curled around a syrup stain from breakfast. Fine, Diné said. Let's negotiate like it's watching. Veln scoffed. Absurd. But Check's nostrils flared. The Vraxian, equivalent of a suppressed smirk. And what does the esteemed Moogie think of our terms? Lyra stroked the plush with exaggerated care. Moogie says you're both stinky. The tension cracked like overstretched wire. Someone coughed. Another delegate hid a smile behind their datapad. Child psychology backs this play. Reintroduce stakes through innocent perspectives. Earth's Camp David Accords nearly derailed until someone's toddler asked why the grown-ups couldn't share. Here, the effect was similar. Impossible to posture when your audience was a child's comfort object. Deanne nudged the toy's tail. Moogie's right. Both sides are holding prisoners. Maybe we trade lists instead of ultimatums. Veln opened his mouth, closed it. The Moogie's unblinking gaze seemed to weigh his response before he spoke. 20 for 20, he muttered. Checks. Claws tapped the table. With medical staff included. The Moogie pulsed approvingly. What happened next wasn't magic. The toy didn't solve decades of interstellar hostility. But it changed the room's geometry. Suddenly, the delegates weren't facing each other across a battlefield. They were gathered around something that demanded better from all of them. First batch exchanges at dawn, Dean said. Lyra nodded sagely. Moogie likes dawn. Veln uncapped his stylus with more force than necessary. Do we need the plush's approval for every? Yes, said 3 humans and 2 Vraxians simultaneously. The lists got written. The terms got amended. Through it all, the Moogie presided like the galaxy's most unqualified mediator. Its presence did what no diplomat could, made everyone slightly embarrassed to act like warriors. By session's end, they'd agreed on 3 prisoner transfers, shared medical access, and after Lyra's relentless campaigning, syrup rations for human detainees. Moogie's tired now, Lyra announced, scooping up the toy. Check actually bowed as it passed. Just slightly. Just enough. Deanne later found the toy propped on the war room's central console, its lopsided stare overseeing the final draft. Someone had given it a tiny diplomat sash made from shredded documents. Conflict resolution studies all say the same thing. Lasting peace needs shared symbols. White flags, signed treaties, a child's battered toy resting between former enemies. The Moogie glowed contentedly in the dim room. Its repaired eye caught. The light just so. Funny how something so small could steady the hands that signed a war's end. The toy pulsed once, slow, steady, as the final terms were sealed. The first batch of pancakes hit the alien griddle with a hiss. Vraxian replicators could synthesize anything down to the molecular level, tenderized brock meat, crystalline desserts that sang when you bit them. But the moment DNA poured lumpy batter onto their pristine surface, the machine wailed like a kicked dog. No recipe deviation detected, complained the chef bot. Its claws twitched over the smoking mess. Nutritional profile inconsistent. Texture variables unstable. Lyra kicked its leg. Shut up and flip. Cultural assimilation always starts with food. Earth history proved it. Italian tomatoes in China, chili peppers conquering every continent. By that logic, pancakes qualified as invasive species. D&E prodded the edge with a spatula made from salvaged armor plating. See the bubbles? That's when you... The bot interrupted by spinning the entire griddle 180 degrees, launching half-cooked batter at the wall. Or that works too, Dean muttered. Officially, this was intercultural exchange, listed on the docket between trade talks and weapons inspections. Unofficially, everyone knew the truth. Lyra had declared syrup a strategic necessity, and the kitchen staff was terrified of her. The bot scraped pancake remnants off its manipulators, proposing standardized nutrient discs instead. Lyra bared her teeth at it. No discs, circles with flop. Food anthropologists could have written papers on this moment. Human cooking thrived on imperfection, slightly burnt edges, uneven rises, the alchemy of guessing measurements. Vraxian cuisine valued precision down to the atom. Watching Dean eyeball buttermilk substitute made the sous chef's scales twitch. Again, he said, pouring fresh batter. Slow this time. The bot hesitated. Its programming clearly battled between protocol and Lyra's death glare. With agonizing slowness, it slid the spatula under. Jara chose that moment to sweep in, flanked by ministers. The kitchen staff froze mid-task. You're letting him poison our equipment, Veln hissed. Lyra flopped a finished pancake onto a plate. Proof it's safe. She shoved it at Jara with syrup-drenched claws. The standoff lasted 3 breaths. Then Jara did something no footage would ever capture. She tore off a piece with her claws and sniffed. Every Vraxian present recoiled in horror. Royalty didn't eat primitive slop. Royalty certainly didn't accept food handed by sticky children. Yet here was their queen gamely chewing while her aides looked ready to faint. Jara's nostrils flared. Crude, but not entirely without merit. Lyra whooped, splattering batter on the ministers. Word reached the diplomatic corps by lunch. By dinner, 3 trade delegates had requested human morning bread with their nutrient paste. The real turning point came when Jara added syrup to the official negotiation terms, not as a concession, as a separate line item under cultural exchange. 1 standard barrel per 20 prisoners, she stated, claws tapping the table. Velen choked. You can't be serious. Lyra smacked her lips. Need more for next time. Dean watched the stunned human delegates process this. Centuries of conflict resolved over breakfast foods. Later, historians would call it the pancake doctrine. The moment, both sides realized they could share something that wasn't a threat. The kitchen bot still hated him. Its next attempt at pancakes came out geometrically perfect but tasted like despair. Not how that works, Dean told it, flipping the next batch by hand. Lyra stole a misshapen one from the pile. Ugliest tastes best. Jara watched the chaos with quiet amusement. In another life, she might have been the type of parent who banned sugar. Here, she accepted a second serving, smaller this time, drizzled instead of drowned. The smell lingered for days. Warm flour caramelizing sugars, that unmistakable burnt-edge tang. It worked its way into air filters and clothing seams. Delegates started showing up early, lingering after sessions. Subliminal messaging worked best when it was edible. Eni caught the human quartermaster grinning over her plate. Reminds me of, home, she admitted. Lyra licked syrup off her claws. Now your home is here too. The bot beeped mournfully as another uneven pancake landed on the stack. History rarely records these turning points. The quiet moments between battles when enemies realize they share cravings. The griddle sizzled, filling the spire with the scent of something almost familiar. The sound carried farther than expected. The nameplate outside Dean's quarters read, Sergeant Pancakes. He'd tried removing it 3 times. Each morning, it reappeared, scratched into fresh metal, carved into his breakfast tray, once even laser-etched onto his damned laundry chute. I didn't sign up for this, he muttered during strategy meetings. Lyra kicked his shin under the table. Uncle Creeper doesn't get a vote. Political scientists would call Dean's position unique. A battle-hardened grunt turned accidental diplomat, trusted precisely because he had no political ambitions. In reality, it meant both sides got furious when he refused to take their side every single time. The human delegation expected back-channel support. The Vraxian War Council assumed his cooking lessons implied loyalty. Dean's stubborn neutrality pissed everyone off equally. Just give them the damn trade routes, he'd yawn when negotiations stalled. Minister Velen's scales would ripple with outrage. You don't understand interplanetary 30% shared custody for 6 months, Dine would interrupt, doodling on a napkin. See who bleeds more profits. The scary part? They started doing it. His offhand suggestions became policy faster. Then official proposals. Royal aides would quote him in closed sessions. As the Earth mercenary observed, Lyra made it worse. She'd taken to calling him Uncle Creeper in formal addresses. The nickname spread like a virus, first among junior staff, then the kitchen, crews, until even Jara's most stoic generals used it behind his back. You realize this undermines my authority, Dini griped after one such incident. Jara barely looked up from her tactical displays. You never had any. The truth stung. His influence came from having nothing left to lose. No home fleet to please, no political aspirations to safeguard, just blunt observations from someone who'd patched both sides' armor under fire. The breaking point came during the Kessel Corridor debates. 12 hours of circular arguments about mining rights with Lyra asleep against Dean's shoulder, drooling on his patch job. Enough. He stood, dislodging the kid. You want compromise? Humans mine odd months. Vraxians take evens. Split year-end bonuses down the middle. Check dropped his datapad. That's obvious. Dean grabbed a ration bar. Yeah, wake me when the grown-ups agree. They implemented his plan verbatim within 48 hours. History books love charismatic leaders and grand speeches. Real change often comes from exhausted sergeants too sleep-deprived to care about decorum. Dean's greatest diplomatic asset turned out to be his willingness to nap through procedural debates. Security protocols changed after someone caught Lyra reprogramming Dean's name into the Spire's announcement system. Now his quarters were officially listed as Uncle Creepy's Nap Cave in 6 languages. My legacy, he groaned, staring at the updated schematics. Lyra beamed. Better than Sergeant Nobody. The nickname ceremony was inevitable. Jara presided, with mock solemnity while the entire kitchen staff watched. They presented Dean with a plaque, his genuine rank crossed out, Sergeant Pancakes engraved beneath in sprawling common and delicate Vraxian script. This is defacement of military property, he said. The syrup tax passes today, Jara countered. Would you rather be remembered for that? Political science has theories about why outsiders broker peace. Less ego, fewer debts. Deanie's version was simpler. Nobody expected him to be wise, so he could say dumb things that happened to work. The soil. Nameplate stayed. Lyra took to signing official documents with a tiny pancake doodle next to her claw print. Diplomats started adding them as good luck charms, first as jokes, then in earnest. You've created a monster, Dean told her. She patted his shoulder with syrup-sticky claws. Our monster. The Spire's archives would later debate his exact title, advisor, intermediary, but the kitchen logs settled it. Daily requisition forms listed one Sergeant Peen KK right between Lyra's tutors and the bomb disposal. Unit.Dean found the final insult in his duty roster. Someone had scheduled him for weekly diplomatic pancake maintenance. He showed up anyway. Lyra sat cross-legged on the counter, licking batter off a combat knife. Make the ugly one with the ears again. Across the Spire, delegates debated hyperspace lanes and prisoner releases. Here in the kitchen, the real work continued, one misshapen breakfast at a time. The griddle hissed. The scent of burning butter filled the air vents. Somewhere, a freshly carved nameplate gleamed. Sergeant Pancakes, reporting for duty. The new Capitol's banners still smelled like scorched metal when the wind shifted. Those grand Unity murals draped over pockmarked walls where plasma burns had cut deep. The artisans worked fast, but some wounds took years to fade. Dean rubbed his thumb along one banner's edge, feeling the rough texture beneath. The art showed human and Vraxian hands clasped together, fingers and claws entwined. From a distance, it looked seamless. Up close you could see the hurried stitchwork hiding the tears. Lyra barreled into his shin before he could dwell on it. Our plants need checking. She'd taken to saying our like it was nothing. Our gravity farm, our peace treaty, our stupid, stinky human who left syrup everywhere. The first time she'd said it, Dean choked on his coffee. Now it just sat there in his chest, warm and strange. Post-war capitals all shared the same fragile energy. Too many wary glances in crowded streets, too many hands hovering near hidden weapons. The gravity farm was different, maybe because plants couldn't betray you, or because the hybrid seedlings were too busy fighting for sunlight to care about old grudges. Lyra dragged him past the new security checkpoint. The guards nodded, not at him, at her, the princess and her pet human. The farm's air hit like a punch, earth wheat sweat, Vraxian mineral tang, the ozone crackle of the gravity regulators. It smelled like progress and desperation mixed together. Rows of floating crops stretched before them, glowing barley swaying beside terrestrial tomatoes, their roots tangled in shared nutrient baths. Some plants thrived, others clung to life like war orphans. See? Lyra jabbed a claw at a struggling sapling. Yours is winning. Deanne crouched to check the soil. Earth stock grafted to alien root systems, a Frankenstein crop that had no business surviving. Yet here it was, pushing out new leaves despite everything. "You planted it crooked," he said. Lyra kicked his boot. "Made it stronger." Peace studies call this the fragile dawn period, when ceasefires are fresh enough to shatter at a bad glance, when former enemies share meals but still sleep with one eye open. The gravity farm had become the Spire's unlikeliest safe zone. Humans and Vraxians side by side, arguing over irrigation schedules instead of body counts. The tomato plants, leaves shivered under Dean's fingers. He'd seen the reports. Insurgents poisoning fields on both sides. Purists trying to kill the experiment before it took root. Yet every morning more volunteers showed up to tend the crops. Not because they believed in unity, but because hunger was a stronger motivator than ideology. Lyra poked a bioluminescent pod until it pulsed. "When do we eat them?" "Another month." Boring. She flopped onto the soil, uncaring of her formal robes. The kid had two settings, royal air and feral gremlin. Right now, chocolate smears around her mouth tipped the scales toward gremlin. Dean sat beside her, stretching his bad knee. Somewhere above them, the Spire's defense turrets cycled through their hourly diagnostics. Old habits died hard. Lyra rolled onto her stomach, scattering dirt across his boots. "Tell me the cow story again." "What cow?" "The stupid one with 3 legs." Dean groaned but complied. By the third telling, Lyra was reciting it with him, bad impressions and all. Her giggles bounced off the greenhouse domes, mingling with the hum of gravity stabilizers. A Vraxian agritech paused nearby, ears twitching at the noise. A human mechanic elbowed him. Not a threat, just familiarity. The shared glance said everything. Kids were kids in any language. Dean's implant pinged. Another council summons. Another debate about border patrols. He silenced it. For now, there was just this. Crooked plants. Lyra's elbow digging into his ribs. The way the afternoon light caught the floating pollen motes like fireflies. The air smelled like scorched metal and fresh earth. Like something broken and something growing. Lyra's tail thumped his leg. "Again!" Dean sighed and restarted the story. Peace wasn't grand gestures or signed treaties. It was this, sharing silly stories in the dirt while the world held its breath, letting a kid's laughter fill the spaces where sirens used to scream. Somewhere, overhead the banners flapped. The stitches held. Lyra's voice rose in an off-key rendition of the Space Cow song. The human mechanic joined in, horribly offbeat. The agritech groaned but didn't leave. Dean leaned back on his elbows and let the moment unfold. Imperfect, fragile, and alive. The scent of growing things mixed with ozone and syrup-sticky fingers. The sound carried farther than expected. The K. Moogie sits in a climate-controlled case now, its patched eye facing the council chamber doors. Visitors pause to admire it, the little plush toy that survived war and diplomacy alike. Dean walks by most mornings, coffee in hand, on his way to another excruciating meeting about syrup tariffs. Peace looks different up close. Less grand speeches, more grocery lists, fewer medals, more grease stains. The mural outside shows him holding Lyra's hand, but the real legacy burns in the kitchen. Scorched griddle marks and sticky counters where 2 civilizations learned to share breakfast. Lyra still steals his bacon. Some things never change.